Tako, še enkrat en lep dobro večer vsem skupaj, dobrodošli na našem že tretjem večeru predavanj v sklopu cikla od kulturne dediščine do trajnostnega razvoja, ki ga pripravljamo v kulturni rezidenci Podlog pod Bohorjem. Danes današnja gostja z nami je dr. Licia Calvi, profesorica, raziskovalka, ki s svojim delom odstira predvsem zelo zanimivo zgodbo oziroma zelo zanimivo smer raziskovanja muzejskih izkušenj ter uporabo digitalizacije pri aktualizaciji kulturne dediščine. Pri njenem delu je predvsem zelo zanimivo ta kontekst pripovedovanja zgodb oziroma zgodbe, ki res na nek način krojijo izkušnje, ki jih potem različni muzeji skozi projekte predstavljajo svojim obiskovalcem. V veliki meri je zelo zanimiv kontekst tudi za vso našo regijo, ker imamo veliko zanimivih zgodb, tako da upam, da bo to še eden izmed prijetnih večerov, kjer se lahko vsi skupaj naučimo morda nekaj novega, po drugi strani pa morda najdemo inspiracijo za kakšne nove ideje in projekte. So without further ado, welcome Licia. It's really a true pleasure to have you as our guest today. I just made a very brief introduction of your work and your direction of the presentation, and now I would warmly invite you to come to the virtual front and then present us with your presentation.
Yes. Okay. So I can share already.
Just a second, I will just change shift. Now you should be possible able to do it.
This was not it. They were still there. Okay, so thank you so much, Matix, for introducing me to your audience, and thank you so much for having me here this evening to speak to you. What I would like to do is to walk you through a number of placemaking projects that I've worked on in the last couple of years, where I will also try to show you the element of digitization of cultural heritage, as the title says. So I will show you in which way you can benefit from a digital element in these placemaking projects, and what the purpose of this is. We will see that the point is not digitization as a mean in itself. It is never a goal of all these projects. But if you add a digital element, a digital component in the form of an installation, in the form of an application, that can enrich the experience of the visitors, of the tourists, of the tourist destination, and turn their experience into something that is more meaningful, that it is more memorable, that it is also transformative in a way. Before I start, I need to say that obviously the projects that I'm going to present to you are not projects that I've been developing by myself, but that there is a team behind. There is a core team of 3 people that consists of Monique Hover, Julian van Welwijk, and myself. And then because these projects have been developed over several years and have gone through different phases, in each of these phases, more people were involved. And among them, the people, the researchers that have mostly contributed to the projects are Frank Owens, Bertine Bargeman, Niels Wittekamp, Wim Strijbos. These are the ones off the top of my head. And Anders Mitas. These are really the people that are mainly the team that has been involved in all these projects. This slide shows an overview of the placemaking projects that as a team we have been developed in the last years, let's say in the last 7 to 8 years. Maybe from the titles you can see that there are different kinds of projects related to artists, to tourist destinations, to cultural sites, but also to natural heritage. For instance, this project here, the National Park, it's about a park in Brabant, a region in the south of the Netherlands, that will be named after Vincent van Gogh. And for this, we also had to develop a narrative concept with storylines and also come up with some digital interventions. But the projects that I want to present to you today are these 3. One that is called Becoming Vincent, about Vincent van Gogh. One which is called Crossroads, and it's about the heritage related to the Second World War in Brabant. And this one, which is about a museum, a city palace in a small town, again in Brabant, which is called Bergen op Zoom. I don't know if I'm going to be able to tell you everything because it's really a very long presentation, but let's get started and let's see how far we get. As I was mentioning at the beginning, in all these projects, the goal has never been to develop something digital or to digitize cultural heritage, but it has always been to find a story that could resonate into people, being them the visitors, the tourists, or just anybody passing by in a specific location in a tourist destination, in a city, or visiting a museum. And then once we have found this story and once we have been able to identify the main protagonists or the characters of that story, to see whether or not a technological intervention would also make sense and would also help enhance the experience, facilitate the experience for the visitors and for the tourists. So the starting point has always been finding a story, and about the story, really what is crucial is to be able to empathize with the character, which is the protagonist of the story. As you see in this on this slide, I see I also still need to admit people. I hope I won't forget. Empathy is really a crucial component in bringing about narrative transportation. So if you want people to be dragged into your story, to be immersed in the story, to forget about everything that happens around them, they need to be able to empathize with the character, the main character, or the most important characters in the story that you're going to tell them. And what is empathy? This is also something that we find is important to specify and to be clear about. Empathy is no identification, and is also no sympathy. Empathy really means that as a person, you are going to recognize yourself in somebody else, in another human being, and to recognize that that other human being is the same as yourself. This is important, as we're going to see in the stories that I'm going to tell you, in the projects, in the placemaking projects that I will discuss with you. And you will also see how this empathic element has been translated into the digital interventions that we have developed as part of these projects. Yes. So with these starting points in mind, what we have done is that in the various projects that you have seen in the first slides, we have tried to identify the stories of real people. And normally these real people were real people from the past. If we think of Vincent van Gogh, if we think of World War II, and also in the last example, if we think of this museum, it would be a story of a marquise who lived in Bergen op Zoom, so in this town in Brabant in the 17th century. And in their stories, identify the universal values that are present, because universal values like, you know, love, friendship, sense of justice, courage, peace, because these are the values that resonate in everybody's heart, regardless of their background, of their cultural background, of their origin, of their ethnicity, of their personal history and the experience that they've gone through. And so when we are able to recognize these universal values, these stories will generate empathy in the listeners or in the viewers. And this empathy will make sure that the experience that they live at the location, at the destination, in the museum, in the heritage site, will be emotional experiences. And this emotional experience will enable them to establish also an emotional connection with the place where the stories take place. And those are also the places where we want the stories to be told. So please keep in mind this sort of line of reasoning, because you will see in the stories and the interventions, in the digital interventions that we developed, how empathy and emotions play a very important role in making sure that visitors and tourists not only feel connected to the place, but also engaged with the place and engaged with every means, in this case, digital interventions indeed, that we had developed for those places. So the first story, the first project is about Vincent van Gogh. I would like to ask you, what do you know about Vincent van Gogh? What comes to mind when I say Vincent van Gogh? Maybe since we are with so few people, you can just pick up, and that's fine if we introduce some level of interactivity, I would say.
Lahko se odmutate pa povete vašo asociacijo, ko slišite ime Vincent van Gogh.
Tell me if I'm speaking too fast. I'm also not English native speaker, so that's fine. Anybody?
Then since
Well,
I'm unmuted, I will say fine arts. That would be my first association. And Dutch.
right, yeah. I see something in the chat. No. Okay. So what most people think about when they think about Vincent van Gogh, and let me see if the slide works. I see it doesn't. Let me see. They think sunflowers, which is this very famous painting that everybody has read or have studied in arts history books, and maybe you've also been able to see it at the museum in Amsterdam. They also think about these episodes of the earlobe that he has cut towards the end of his life, because as you know, Van Gogh, this is also another association that is made with him, was suffering from some, mental disorders. And in one of these, moments in which he was a little bit psychotic, one of the things that he did was to cut his earlobe. But another event or episode or thoughts that people think of when thinking about Vincent van Gogh is the fact that he had a very strong and deep relationship, bond tie with his brother Theo. And this is a fragment from a movie, from one of the many movies that have been made around his life. Theo was some years younger than him, and he has always been present in Vincent's life to support him financially, since he has gone through very many difficulties throughout his life, but also to support him emotionally and really mentally as well, in helping him going through all these issues and these dilemmas and these difficulties that he had. Another element that people think of are the letters. You might know that Vincent van Gogh has written more than 800 letters to friends, families, and that's about 700 of them were addressed precisely to his brother. And then two other pictures that I've put on these slides are again a statue that it is in one of the villages in Brabant that represents again this very strong tie and connection with the brother. And here a map that represents the places where Van Gogh has lived throughout his life. Maybe I need to specify or to tell you first that Van Gogh had a very short life. He died when he was 37, but the life was very intense. Of those 37 years, so he was born in 1853, I had to check it again before the presentation, and he died in 1890. And he lived until about 1880 or 1885, actually, in the Netherlands, and the majority of the time in Brabant, which is this region again in the south of the Netherlands. You see it here, this is Brabant. And there are very locations in Brabant that are associated with Vincent van Gogh because he was either born there, like Zundert, that you see here, or he lived when he was a young adult, like Etten-Leur, or Tilburg, where he has studied to become a painter. And then there is also Nuenen, which is another place where there is now a workshop, an atelier that he has used also for drawing classes. But the majority of the international tourists, when they think Van Gogh, they never think of Brabant, and they absolutely never think about one of these places. International tourists, this is a research that we did at the beginning of this project, mainly think of Amsterdam, because in Amsterdam there is the museum that is named after him, where the most important paintings are on display, like for instance the sunflowers that I've shown you before. Another location that international tourists normally associate with Van Gogh is the Provence, so the south of France, because that is the place where he spent the last years of his life, where so the episode of the cutting of the earlobe has happened and where he has ultimately died. So around 2014, the province of Brabant commissioned us this placemaking project with the purpose of asking us to use Vincent van Gogh as a brand image for the region. So they wanted us to use Van Gogh as a way to attract international tourists to the region, making them aware that actually Van Gogh belongs to this region and not to Amsterdam or to France, like most people seem to think, most international tourists seem to think. And what we have done, we have used him as a sort of a connecting pin to connect all these locations that you see here and to make sure that an international tourist coming to Brabant could recognize in this location part of the heritage related to Vincent van Gogh. The name of the project is Becoming Vincent. And as you can read on the slides, this title had a dual meaning and double meaning. On the one hand, we wanted to concentrate on developing a story and developing elements connected to the heritage and to the locations where Van Gogh that were associated to the early years of Van Gogh, at the time when Van Gogh was just an artist in development, where he was not yet the artist that we know nowadays. So these were his formation years, and these are also the locations where he could develop as the artist that we know today. So this is why Becoming Vincent. But Becoming Vincent has also another layer, and that refers back to what I was mentioning before about the empathy. The idea is that in listening to his story and in connecting to the heritage that is related to him, the visitors, the tourists, could develop empathy for him and could become Vincent themselves, because they could recognize themselves in the events, in the episodes, in the struggles, in the dilemmas, in the difficulties that he had experienced, and therefore would develop this emotional connection with him, and as a consequence also with the locations related to that particular part of Vincent van Gogh's life. So before going in details into what we did to achieve this result, I want to show you again a map of the locations related to Van Gogh. So you see all these are locations in Brabant. Then you see Amsterdam, where there is just a museum. And then also this other place in the north of Holland, Oslo, where there is another important museum. We were mainly focusing on the 3 locations in Brabant that you see on this map. Zundert. Sorry, I need to move around our pictures. Zundert, where he was born and where there is still the house where he was born. And this house has also been reconstructed according to the descriptions of the house and of the garden, which is behind the house, that is in the letters that I was showing to you before. Then we have Epilogue, which is the location where the family Van Gogh has moved in the late 70s, so in the 1870s. The father was a vicar, and there is a church that has become his parish, and the family has been living there for some time. And there is important episodes related to this time that have also been that we have also been considering in developing our interventions. And then there is Nuenen, where he has studied, as I was mentioning, drawing techniques, and where there is now a center where, you know, some of the drawings are on display. So the problem with these locations is not only that they are not known to an international public, but also that they are very diverse. So they are diverse in quality, in the way in which they have been maintained throughout the years. As I was saying, Zundert, the house in Zundert has been restored recently following the description in the letters, but the other 2 locations have not been maintained at the same level of quality. And also the kind of heritage, the kind of, you know, legacy that is on display related to Van Gogh is very different. This is why it is difficult for tourists to make the connection and to make the association with them. So what we did, we looked into the story, so the biography of Vincent van Gogh, to try and see whether we could find some elements that could draw the empathy of visitors and that we could use in developing, you know, interventions related to this heritage. And what we saw is that we could almost recognize a one-to-one match between the life of Vincent van Gogh and this storytelling tool that is called the hero's journey. The hero's journey is a storytelling tool that has been developed by narratologists like Campbell and Vogler, and that is used can be recognized in legends, in sagas, in fairy tales, and even nowadays, as you see on the slides, in blockbuster movies like The Lord of the Rings, in Pixar movies like Nemo, in Netflix series like the Breaking Bad, but also in games, a lot in games. And actually, if we stop one moment and if we think about our own life, we will see that even our life could reflect somehow this journey. So the hero's journey describes the life of a hero, of a legend, of a saga, of a fairy tale, as consisting of 12 steps. And the hero appears at a certain moment in step 1 that you see here, the prologue, and then has to go through a series of successes, of failures, of falls and rising again, until he gets until the end of his life, where, you know, something happened. Normally the heroes die, the hero dies, and then there is some legacy that he leaves for the people who are coming after him. So if by looking at these 12 steps, we could see that there was again almost a one-to-one correspondence with Van Gogh's life. And here you see the life of Vincent van Gogh. For each of these steps, we have identified a location, which is a real location where Vincent has lived throughout his 37 years of life. And the locations really follow this chronology as well. And if you see on the previous slide, there is a title for each step, which defines what happens in the hero's life in that particular stage of the journey, phase of the journey. And this is something that we could also find in Vincent's life following this schema. Here you see again this distinction in the two halves. The first part, the first 6 steps that we have called Becoming Vincent, because also if you look at the locations, they really are the locations in Brabant where he has trained to become an artist, where he has learned to become an artist, and where he was not yet known as the artist, as the master that we know today. But from the lower half, where that is here called Becoming Vincent, and it starts from Paris. So around 1885, Vincent definitely left the Netherlands and moved first shortly to Antwerp, and then to Paris, and then to the south of France, the Provence, where he stayed until the moment that he died. So these are really the years where he was already famous. He was already recognized as an artist, as a well-talented artist, as a master. And this is why this part of the hero's journey we have decided to call Being Vincent. So, but we were only focusing on the first half, the Becoming Vincent, because they were the years of formation for him to become an artist. And with this project, we have tried to connect this location that I've been mentioning already several times, so that the tourist coming to the Netherlands could decide to follow Vincent's storyline, and in this way also physically visiting all of these locations. But he could also, starting from Zundert, where he was born, going through Ettenleur and then Nuenen. But obviously anybody can also just follow any route throughout this location, as long as the visitor is capable of making the connection with Vincent's own life. I want to show an example of what we did in relation to the second location on this map. Sorry, let's see if I can go back. Ettenleur, where he spends the life when he was in his early 20s. So at a certain moment, as I was mentioning before, the family moved to Ettenleur. It was the 1870s. The father was a vicar, and he was preaching in this church. At that moment, Vincent van Gogh had been shortly in England. He has decided to come back home in the family house. During that period, there was a cousin living or visiting the parents, Kay Vos, who was 7 years senior Vincent, and who was there with her child. And Vincent has become madly in love with her and has proposed, but she was not interested, and he has said no. He has rejected him. And at that point, he has left and got back home. She was living in Amsterdam together with her father. But Vincent could not accept this rejection and has really started to literally follow her, to stalk her. So he has gone to Amsterdam, knocking at the door, asking, requesting, really pretending almost to see her, to talk to her. And as you can imagine, the uncle was very upset by his behavior. Kay herself, so the cousin, was also not very pleased by this stalking behavior, but also the parents of Vincent van Gogh were not happy and were feeling ashamed of what Vincent was doing. So what has happened in this specific location, there has been a very dramatic fight, if you want, between Vincent and his father. And at the end of this fight, the father has just sent him away, told him to leave the house and never to come back. So what we have done some years ago, it was 2016 actually, with some game students from our university, we have developed a storyboard and a script representing this story. And the students have developed also an experience in virtual reality. Here you see some screenshots of the experience. Unfortunately, the video was online, has been online for some time. It is not anymore. I will show you a very small video just to give you an impression of what this was about. And this is the storyboard that we have developed. This experience has been on display for almost 2 years, so from 2016 to 2018, in that church that I was showing to you before in Ettenleur. And so that when the visitors were visiting the heritage related to Van Gogh, so the church and the parish, they could also experience this episode of his life. And obviously, this is a very particular episode. Maybe it doesn't happen to many of us to just live the same thing to fall in love with a cousin, to be rejected, to get mad about this. But certainly what we all have experienced is this, discussions with our parents, a fight maybe with the father or the mother. And we know how it feels when you are still living at home to need to, to get into this sort of discussion and this sort of quarrels. And this is exactly this becoming Vincent element that we have introduced in the story and that we wanted to use to generate empathy in the viewers and to have them identify with some universal values, in this case, the love for the parents, actually. And in this way, to feel much more connected or better connected with the location, so with the church and with Vincent van Gogh. And here I have a short video. This is not so the final product. As I told you, it's no longer online and I don't have the video anymore, but this is just when we have done some tests with some participants during an open day at our university. So I hope you will be able.
When you were like going through the story, that's quite uncomfortable. This way, you feel that they have a bit more decisive control over where they want to go.
Licia, I think the video doesn't work. It's just the sound in the background.
Okay, well, let me see. There is somebody explaining what is happening, but okay, that's not really important. I really wanted to give you a little bit the impression of what is happening in this virtual reality experience, for which, as you see on the picture, you needed to use these Oculus Rift glasses. Obviously, as I said, it was 2016, so in the meantime, technology has evolved a lot. The idea was that you could walk inside the house where the Van Gogh family was living, and I hope you have noticed how in which details the house has been reconstructed. It has been really reconstructed following the ways in which houses were built, were furnished, were designed in those years. But you could navigate freely inside the house. And then at some point you were assisting at this dialogue between Vincent and the parents. The dialogue was about this episode with the cousin and the rejection. And at the end you could see that the father was sending him out of the house, and actually it was never to come back. Yeah, so this is what we made out of this, the kind of digital product that we developed out of this project. This project has finished actually, but there are still developments, there are still spin-offs going on. One of them is a movie that has been developed by the province itself, and that is again called Becoming Vincent, because really this idea of the empathy, of the universal values, of visitors or tourists identifying and therefore developing a stronger emotional connection with the location is something that has remained resonating also in the stakeholders that were involved in these projects. And the stakeholders were indeed the province. And in this particular case of the VR experience, it was also one of the guides of the church who was very much using this Oculus Rift experience, virtual reality experience, to enrich his explanation and his guided tour of the church when he was giving that to the tourists. Okay, the next project is the project about heritage related to the Second World War, again in Brabant, in this province. Again, my question to you is, what do you think when you think about Second World War? What are things that come to mind? Here I have again just a number of possible images. Probably you have also been reading when you were studying at school the diary of Anne Frank. That is something that we had to read, even if I'm Italian, a lot when I was at high school. Probably you also think of some movies. Here you see some of them, or even A Bridge Too Far, Saving Private Ryan, sorry. Even some video games like Call of Duty, but rather than that, because these are obviously more recent developments, you think of the destruction, you think of the deportations, you think of the resistance. There was a lot of resistance in Italy, there was a lot of resistance also in the Netherlands where we are located. So again, from the province, we were asked to develop a narrative concept again, like similarly to the one related to Vincent van Gogh, that could relate other locations in Brabant, the locations where there is heritage about the war. And here you see some of the location. The most important one, and this is the one that I will be using now as an example, is this National Memorial Camp Richt. This one here, here on the right, that used to be a concentration camp, mainly for children, from which children transport was departing and the children were sent to extermination camps in some other parts of Germany mainly. But then there were other museums or other heritage sites that were part of this project. For instance, here in the middle, you see General Maciek Museum. That is a museum in Breda that is related to the Polish troops army that liberated the south of the Netherlands, starting from the city of Breda, and that were guided by this General Maciek, of which there is still a monument in the middle, in the city center. And then other museums like this one here on the bottom, Bevrijd de Vleugels, the Museum Overloon, which is more in the north of the province, where a very important battle for the liberation of the country has taken place. So the province wanted us to develop something similar to Van Gogh to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the liberation of the Netherlands, which has been celebrated in 2019. The project that we created is called Crossroads, Life-Changing Stories 4045, because in this case, what we wanted to focus on were the turning points, the dilemmas that people have to face during the years of the war, and that's had an impact on their own life and possibly also on the life of people around them. Turning points, dilemmas that obviously were provoked by the war and by the situation in which these people were finding themselves. So it is again stories of real people from the past, as I was saying before. In this case, they were ordinary people. So we will not find any famous general in the stories that we have been telling and that we have been collecting, but just people like me and you who happen to be in difficult situations during the war, who had to make choices, and that as a consequences of the choices that they had made, events have happened that could bring a happy hand, if you want, to some of the people that were involved in these events, who could bring hope, but who could simply also be ending bad, because that was the time of the war, obviously. So the focus was really on these life-changing events. And contrary to the previous project, where we had one character who was very clear and there was no discussion that we had to tell his story, in this case, it was impossible to choose one single story and to choose one single protagonist, one single character, because there are thousands of stories. Even if we think of just one single country like the Netherlands, so there are thousands of stories that can be told, thousands of protagonists of this story. So it was difficult to make choices. And we have really to identify somebody who could be, if you want, the entry point, who could be, whose story could be so emblematic, could be so emblematic that could be considered as a kind of, the rabbit hole in Alice in Wonderland story. So to attract people, to create awareness and to make people more interested and curious, if you want, although maybe when we talk about this kind of stories, saying curious is not really the right adjective that we want to use, but to make people aware of what has happened at the time, and to make them more interested in getting to know more about these stories and about the war and about this period. And with, again, the assumption that identifying universal values would touch people, their universal values would resonate into people, would create a more enriching experience. And this experience would make sure that on the one hand, they would feel better connected or more connected to the locations where the stories are told, but also maybe make them aware of things, because maybe we have certain prejudices about the events in the war, because maybe we don't really know what has happened. We are all far too young, so we have only heard about these stories, right? But we can be aware of what has happened, be aware of the consequences of the war, be aware of that, for instance, the freedom, the democracy that we have nowadays and that we give so much for granted are not for granted at all, because there have been people who had to fight for that. And this is really the themes that are touched by these stories. This is something I've already told you. of the many, so how have we collected these stories? We have organized a number of workshops in the locations that I was indicating at the beginning, Vught, Overloon, Breda, and many more locations involving the local communities. And we were asking them to bring at the workshop stories related to the war. And this could be stories that they knew because they have experienced them themselves, stories that they have heard from people who are no longer here because they have passed away, but also from survivors. And then they could not only bring the stories, but also bring the person themselves who could tell their story in person. We have collected actually around 1,000 stories. And of these 1,000 stories, we have selected 75. And why 75? Because the project was supposed to be launched in 2019, 75 years after the liberation of the country. So we wanted to have one story per year after the liberation. And of these 75 stories, I want to tell you now the story, one particular story, which is the story of these two children here on the left, George and Ursula Levy, who were two Jewish children who have been for some time imprisoned in the concentration camp in Vught. And were also supposed, like many other children that you see here in the middle of the slide, they were supposed to be deported in an extermination camp and be exterminated, but that eventually managed to escape and are still alive and still tell their story and hope in this way to generate some awareness. So these are in the middle again, the thousands of children that have been imprisoned in this camp. And this is a monument that you can find if you visit the camp that is now there to commemorate, to celebrate the memories of all those children who have been deported. More than 1,000 children, I think it's 1,200 and something, have passed through this camp on their way to an extermination camp. So really it's an incredible amount. We have taken this story as an example of the many more stories that could be told. These 75 stories have been translated in a number of products, like, you know, the virtual experience in the church in Etten-Leur. Among these products, there is a dilemma maze, this is what you see here on this picture, which is in Tilburg, or has been for some time in Tilburg, that represents yet another of the 75 stories that we have been telling. There have been documentaries of 4 to 5 minutes that have been broadcasted on the television. But the byproduct that I want to mention now, because that relates to the title of this presentation, are augmented reality location-based applications, apps. So for that you see here on the bottom right of the slide. So for instance, if you're interested in getting to know more about the story of George and Ursula Levy, then you need to go to Vught, which is this village here, not far from Den Bosch. So you see also where we are with Breda, and these are also some of the locations that were mentioned in the Van Gogh project. When you arrive at Camp Vught, you will find this cross. This is the icon, the symbol that represents the project. And if you have downloaded the app, the virtual reality app, then you can view the video. So I've called them augmented reality apps, but they are not augmented reality apps in the strict definition of the term, if you have experience with that. They are really 360 degrees videos that last about 1 minute, that have been recorded and with authors enacting the episodes that the story refers to. And here on this slide, you see indeed a snapshot of the story of George and Ursula Levy. So these are the two children. The story is that they were about to embark on the train to be deported to an extermination camp, but there was an older girl in the camp who was taking care of them because they were orphans. This is the girl Flo. And while the SS soldier is taking the children one by one to put them on the train, he asks to George, "Do you need this girl? So do you need Flo? Does she need to stay with you or not?" And at that moment, George had to decide what kind of answer to give, because if he had said yes, possibly Flo was also be put on the train, but also he and his sister would be put on the train and therefore would be brought to this extermination camp. But if he had said no, maybe his own life and the life of the sister would be spared, but the life of Flo might still be in danger because maybe she would still be put on the train to the extermination camp. So these are the kind of turning points, turning elements, life-changing episodes that we have been focusing on in order to decide how to select the stories and how to make the connection between the stories and the location. So in this case, the video, the AR video, shows you what George said. George said no, so that they didn't need Flo. And what has happened is that Flo, so the older girl, has been put on the train while George and his sister's life has been spared. So they have remained in the camp, in Camp Vught. And on a later occasion, the camp has been liberated, and this is why they have been able to survive the war. These 360 degrees videos presents you the episodes. The apps are location based, so you really need to be at the location to be able to understand more, and also, you know, to relive the story, the episode that is told, and then ends in a kind of an open way. They end with a question, or they end presenting you a dilemma. They end asking you the question, what would you have done if you were in George's shoe in this particular case? So again, trying to provoke empathy in the viewers and trying to reconnect the viewer with these universal values. In this case, you know, probably fear, but also love for the sister, also love for this other girl who has been taking care of them. It was a kind of an unfulfilled. These apps have been developed by a design agency that is located in Eindhoven. It's called Dutch Rose Media. And this year they have gone a step further and they have developed something completely different that I want to show you with this other video. Tell me if you hear. I mean, the sound is not really necessary because there are subtitles. Wait.
We still see just the presentation. Or maybe if you share, change the screen that you're sharing.
All right, let me see. How can I do this? This is not what I want. Right? Wait, maybe I need to do like this. I'm sorry about this. I want to move us here and then here. I don't get to, all right, I will send you the link because I don't get to the internet. That's why I suppose that this is still, let me see. Do you see it now? No. All right, probably I had to change the settings. Oh, sorry about that. So what they have done, so now you can experience the stories just by means of your smartphone, and you need to be on the location, as I've said, and you simply watch your screen. And although these are videos and we all have an experience with videos, that's about it. They are immersive, but not totally immersive. What they have done with this video, they have developed, they have captured locations in photogrammetry, so that when you actually download the app and connect to the story, you are fully immersed. So you have a 3D experience. You are immersed in the stories, in the environment in which in the location in which the story is taking place. And the idea is really that you sort of enter a gate and fly back in time and are immersed in the story. And the idea is really that in this way you become part of the story yourself, and you can be much more touched and much more involved in the story development than when you experience the story from the screen of your smartphone. So it's really sorry about this. I don't know how I can maybe change the setting, but I will send you then the link to the video so that you can see it. And I don't know if I have time for a last project. Tell me. Yeah, the last project, just to show you your differences between connecting several locations with one character and then resulting in something like the virtual experience, the VR experience in the church, connecting different locations where there are multitudes of stories that can be told, so multitudes of protagonists, and so having the difficulty and the choice to select which one to go for, and then telling one story that is the representative story for the location. And this resulted in a byproduct like the augmented reality app or this immersive 3D photogrammetry experiences. And the last project is related to this museum, which is called Markiezenhof. It's the city palace in Bergen op Zoom. So it was a palace belonging to a noble family, and it is now become a museum since the late 20th century. There are several exhibitions, And the part of the project that we have developed relates to 3 period rooms that you see in these slides. So we were asked by the museum to redesign these 3 rooms. You see very typical, period rooms with furniture and settings typical of the 18th century. What we have done again, we have tried to identify whether there was a story that we could tell. And we found a story in the one of Annemarie van Arenberg, who was one of the Arenberg family. The Van Arenberg family is the family that at some point has been living in this palace. And Annemarie is a family member, is a young woman, of whom not much is known, because at a certain moment we have discovered she has been banned from the family history, from the family documents, so there is nothing really official that we could find about her life. So there is no formal documentation about her. We had to, in order to understand more about the story, about her story, and to use that, if you want, as the thread to redesign the spaces, the museum spaces, we had to resort to the research that has been done by the town historian, where we have got a number of elements that were very informal, because as I was mentioning before, there is no official documents related to her. And we had to, in this case again, to select which elements to use to tell the story and to redesign the rooms. What we have done again, we wanted to identify in her story elements that could generate empathy in the viewers or in the visitors of the museum in this case, and that could allow these visitors to recognize themselves in her story, because her story was also a little bit extraordinary in a way. So she has been married, she has been given in marriage very young, when she was 17, to this rich nobleman, Francois Gogh. The marriage was not a very happy one, apparently. At some point, she has fallen in love with another man who was the husband's valet. The husband has died. The secret relationship has become public, so known to the family. And the family, who was obviously because of the time, I mean, very much concerned with status, with the money, with inheritance, had put her in front of a choice. She had to choose between staying in the relationship with this other guy and therefore losing, because in the meantime she has also had a child with the first husband. So staying in the relationship with the guy, but losing the custody of her daughter, or breaking up the marriage, breaking up the relationship with this man who was below her status, and remaining part of the family. And this is where we want, the empathy to take place, because probably we also have in our families secrets, stories that everybody knows, but they cannot be told because, there is something to be maybe ashamed of, or that cannot be told, our taboos elements. And also, if we don't want to get personal and really to get to our own personal stories, certainly in a story like this, we can see assonances, affinity with stories like that of Princess Diana, for example, of Meghan Markle, more recently, of other stories that we have heard or that we have read of in the press or in some other fictional elements. So what we have done is that, keeping the historical elements that were already in the rooms and as the ones that you have seen in the 3 pictures, we have introduced some other elements, some of which are digital elements, to tell this story, the story of Anne-Marie, so that the visitors, by entering the rooms, actually the 3 rooms, could see the story unfold, could see the characters that are part of the story. There is her, there is the husband, Francois, there is the secret lover, there is her mother, there is her daughter, there is her brother, there is an uncle who is a cardinal, and there is also a best friend. And all of them have give a different perspective to the story, to this story, bring a different nuance, and bring a different point of view that can help the viewer understand what the visitor actually understand what has happened in those locations, and also generate an opinion about the events, formulate an opinion, and develop some form of empathy or identification with Anne-Marie, or with Marianne, with some of the other characters. This is how we have designed the rooms. So you see, there are 3 rooms, one after the other. You enter from here where it says prologue, and you end at the end where it says epilogue. There is a kind of a linear structure, a linear navigation possible, But in fact, because the story unfolds in this way, in each story there is this star element, which is where an interaction takes place, and normally this is also a digital form of interaction. And then the dots, the pink dots, represent the other characters that are present in the real story of Marianne van Arenberg, and that are also represented in each room in different ways, sometimes by means of a painting, sometimes by means of a jewelry box, sometimes by means of a piano. I will show you next in the slides. And so the navigation, so the way in which the visitors are, let's say, expected to visit these rooms is linear, from the prologue until the epilogue, just because this is the way in which the story unfolds. But actually what we are seeing these days, in which we are evaluating this design of the story of the rooms with the real participants, we see that sometimes participants just run through the rooms without noticing all the elements that are present there. And only when they arrive at the last room, or even at the epilogue room, which is really the closure of the story, they realize that they have missed something. And so they decide to come back and to walk through the story again, through the rooms again. Let me see, we can skip this maybe. So there are 3 rooms. The first one is just a kind of a sitting room, and we have called it a ballroom because we think this is where, you know, the marriage ball has taken place. This is how it looks like. Let me see if you see this small video that should appear here. This is, you know, we really think this is where the marriage ball has taken place. And we've been thinking, for instance, of movies like Il Gattopardo by Luchino Visconti, if you've ever seen it, or other more historical movie with this big, huge ball scene. What have we done is the following. So here on the left, you see the original room. Here in the middle, you see how we have redesigned it. So we have inserted a number of elements, interactive elements, just to again drag the visitor into the story and into the rooms. In particular, here you see this butler who is just at the entrance of the room and who is inviting you to join the ball. And you see the ball just on this kind of a mirror that he is holding, and you see what is happening. In the room, there are other interactive elements. There is, for instance, here behind where this man is standing, actually, there is a jewelry room. And when you approach it, that gets open and you see inside, obviously, money, because this was a status kind of marriage. It was not a marriage for love. And you hear the voice of the brother of Marianne, who tells you his opinion about the marriage. And he tells you that this is indeed an arranged marriage, just because it was necessary for the family to gain more status. Another digital element on the room is the piano. If you sit there, there is another character who is talking to you, and in this case, it is the mother, Marianne's mother, who gives you a different perspective, a different opinion on the marriage. Also, in her case, this is an important marriage for the family, because in this way, the family can keep and can maintain their status. The second room is the sleeping room, and the bedroom, and this is a place where a lot of things happen at the same time. So this is where she gets married, she gives birth to a child, then the husband dies, then the relationship with the valet starts, and then where also the secret marriage with this other man is celebrated, actually. So the room is a little bit more intimate, and it is a little bit darker compared to the ballroom. What you see, this is how the bedroom was originally, with this canopy bed. Here you see how we have redesigned it. So the canopy bed is still there, but then we have added this screen, which shows in Shadowplay all these events that I was just mentioning now to the visitor. So the marriage, the giving birth, the death of the husband, and then the start of the new relationship and the new marriage. This Shadowplay is that here on the right, you don't see it, on the right of the screen, there is a chandelier. If you touch the chandelier, the curtains get closed and this Shadowplay starts, so that you can see indeed the story unfolded. Here there is, in this corner here, there is also a painting, a portrait, which is very similar to the original ones that are hanging there, but this is an interactive portrait. So when you approach it, there is this cardinal who is the uncle who really calls you with the finger like this. And when you are close to him, he tells you his version of the story. And the version is that, again, by, starting the other relationship with a man who is below the status, actually the family is facing a very a huge shame, actually. And therefore, he wants to force Marianne to make a choice and to choose, for the status of the family and to leave the secret lover. And here in the corner, you don't see it very well. There is a fireplace, and again, when you approach there, the fire starts to burn, and you see that there is also a letter that is written by Marianne to her best friend, where she describes, she tells her version of the story, where she says that the marriage with the first husband was not very happy, and that now she's finally happy, and this is why she has decided to make these choices. And the first and the last room is the dining room. This is where actually the climax of the story takes place. Many of us must have experienced heavy discussions while having dinner with family members, but this is also, if you want, a very recurrent theme and topic in many movies. So what we have done here, you see again the original room on the left, here the redesign. So if you sit at the table, a conversation starts, and the conversation is about the family reproaching Marianne for her behavior, for the fact so that she has started this relationship with a man who is below her status. And they put her in front of a choice. She has to decide either to break the relationship and then she can stay in the family and keep the daughter, or to give away custody of the daughter and then just continue in the relationship. And when you sit, you see the interaction unfolding. So you see the voices of the protagonists of this scene speaking. There is the mother, there is Marianne, there is the daughter, there is the cardinal, who is the uncle, who is very much in favor of keeping the money, keeping the finances of the family safe, and so having Anne-Marie sent away from the family, more or less. Also what happened with Vincent in the other project. And you see, so the interaction, you see at a certain moment there is a break and there is a fracture also that is appearing in the middle of the table, just to emphasize what is happening there. And then in the corner on the right that you don't see, there is, let me see if I find here, there is a small table with a screen, and there are the documents. The documents that you as a visitor can sign, and deciding how you want, what you would have done if you were Marianne. So would you sign the divorce documents? Then something happens on the screen. Would you have signed documents to give away custody of your daughter? Then there is another scene appearing on the screen. In the one case, you see that that the family is reunited and that the secret lover is simply sent away from the picture. In the other case, the family only consists of the grandmother and the cardinal and the daughter, and Marianne and the secret lover are going to leave the picture, to leave the scene. And the last room, it's a small room actually, is the epilogue room, because in this room you see really how the real story of Marianne has ended. And in this room, you see there on the right, there is this piece of paper where the real ending is described. And this is a room that was necessary to give closure to the story, because as a visitor you are asked to make a choice. In this way, again, to empathize with one of the characters. It can be Marianne, but it can also be one of the other characters that were present in the story. But you also want to know what really happened. What did Marianne do for real? And then, so this is what this is taking the central stage in the room. It's a smaller room compared to the others. And then in one corner there is a big screen, and there you can take a picture with one of the characters that you can keep as a memory of your visit, or you can just delete. So here again, the idea that the starting point in designing an heritage site remains a story, that in this story, what is important is to find the universal values that can generate empathy in the visitors, in the tourists, in the listeners, and then see how these values can be translated into a byproduct that can be a digital product that is used to enrich the experience, that is used to be an added value to the experience. So the digital byproduct is never the end result, the end in itself, but it is only used to make the experience more memorable, more engaging, more meaningful, also transformative, especially if you think of the stories from the second project, the Second World War, where you really empathize, for instance, with these two children, and you think maybe of your own children and what you would have done if you were in their position. So this is the end of my story. Thank you very much for listening to me and for bearing with me. I hope you have enjoyed it. If you have any questions, I will stop sharing so that maybe it's easier also to talk. And sorry that the video didn't work. I will send you the link to the trailer for the augmented reality experience.
Perfect, thank you so much, Licia. Tako, zdaj pa lahko gremo tudi malce v pogovor, če so mogoče že kakšno vprašanje z vaše strani. Lahko tudi po slovensko vprašate, pa bomo potem seveda prevedli. To da ni problem. Licia pa med tem že poslala tudi povezavo do YouTube videa. Imamo že, we only have one question, which is focusing, well, kind of detailed, but also opening a bit broader discussion. Which technology or technological enhancement is, in your opinion, really the most interesting at the moment? Or let's say, most interesting to apply?
Yeah, what I personally like is the augmented reality. And the reason is that still allows you, not to lose connection with the social environment around you. Because, you get you get additional information to what, for instance, take the example of the augmented reality apps that I was just showing to you. You still get to know something different than simply visiting the camp. You are immersed in the story because the story is really engaging, but on the other hand, you can, if you are not visiting alone, you can still interact with the people around you that are with you because they are accompanying you in the visit, who are just also present as other visitors in the same position. While something like virtual reality, which was very popular, it was a sort of a hype some years ago, has the disadvantage that you are just, in this bubble and that you cannot very much interact, communicate with anybody around you. Now, obviously, we are almost getting to the metaverse, and if you read the reviews, you hear that the metaverse will allow this kind of social interaction also in virtual reality. So I'm very much curious to see whether this is going to be possible. Another thing that I've seen that I have not been able to show to you now, but that I see very much happening, especially in museums, is the use of immersive videos. So, for instance, in Antwerp, where I live, there is a museum that is called the Chocolate Factory, that is a museum about chocolate. Because, as you know, Belgium is very much well known for French fries that are not French and for chocolate. And in the museum, a lot of the experience is created by using immersive videos. So you are in the middle of the room and there are all these projections around you. So you think that you are immersed in whatever story is told in that case. And this has, if you want, it's the best of both worlds. So of the two technological means that I was mentioning before, it allows you to be immersed, so to really be drawn in the story. And this is what I was mentioning at the beginning, one of the most important elements when you tell a story, and still not to lose contact with the reality around you. And here by reality, I mainly mean really the social context in which you are in. And even if you visit by yourself, there are other visitors, and maybe you happen to talk to them or to pick up conversations that they are having. And this is really an essential component of visiting a heritage, a cultural site, not necessarily a museum. So yeah, my answer would be maybe at the conclusion, it would be these interactive videos, and otherwise augmented reality for me is still offering most potentials. Maybe virtual reality if we see what the metaverse is going to have as features, aspects.
And then there was already a follow-up question as well, and they already thank you for the answer. Was also which kind of target audiences or let's say segments are you really addressing with those projects? Do you, I will follow up a bit more. I mean, is the versatility of this approach limited potentially only to a specific younger audience crowd, or would you also see it, or you saw the results being very positive in, let's say, the age segments of the target segments that would be of an older age?
Yeah, that obviously also depends very much on the technology, absolutely. So if you go, for instance, for things like augmented reality that requires people who have some kind of technological literacy. And even though, you know, these days everybody has a little bit of that, maybe, you know, the younger generations are more easily addressed with this kind of technology. However, if you think of technology like the immersive video, that's for everybody, regardless of their age category, but also regardless of, you know, whether they come to visit individually or if they come with children or with grandchildren, because sometimes we see, especially in museums, there are, you know, parents or grandparents coming with their children. So I totally agree that for certain technology, maybe they are more easily accessible to a younger, you know, to the digital natives. But I think that the threshold is getting lower, and that these days they are accessible for any type of segment, for any type of public. I don't really like to talk about segments, and that especially technologies like the immersive projections are for everybody. When you design, you always think about of some kind of public or target group. But if you focus not so much on the technology, but more on on the story, on the universal values, on this idea of the empathy, then you really reach everybody, it resonates with everybody. And what we have seen in this last project that we are evaluating just now, so we have got about 20 participants visiting, going through the experience, and then we ask them, you know, we have a kind of a conversational interviews. We really have people of younger people, not very young. I would say the youngest was maybe 20, 25-ish, and two more older people, not elderly people actually, but still people in their 70s, because there are different kinds of technology. Well, I would say maybe the older generations, because for them it's a little bit newer, I would say, they seem to be more triggered and more also engaged and even entertained by this kind of technologies. So to answer your question, maybe shortly, or to summarize a little bit, I would say, don't focus so much on the technology, focus on the story that you want to say, then decide on what technology to use depending on that. And then you will see that, okay, the age category, the target group becomes less relevant actually, that you can still address, or that you can still attract different types of visitors or tourists.
Very interesting. Torej, v prvi vrsti fokus na neko storyline oziroma zgodbo, potem šele v implementacijo tehnologije kot facilitator krepitve zgodbe, ne pa kot zgolj metoda, ki bo na nek način nagovarjala občinstvo. Morda še kakšno drugo vprašanje? While we're maybe waiting for other questions, I have a question. I mean, because a lot of interesting examples, a lot of ideas that even in my head sparked of what we could be doing in our very, near surrounding. Very practical question, a question nobody likes to talk about, but I mean, if it's not a secret, what was the budget of all those projects or some of the projects? I mean, how much investment was there actually required to spin it off, to kind of start the process?
Yeah. I mean, it depends on, it's not a secret. It depends really on the numbers that you have in mind. They were not very big projects. I would say 20, 30K. But there is a but, because, we were working with cultural institutions, so it's known that the funds are very limited. And secondly, especially if you think of the Van Gogh project, what I've said, that the VR experience has been developed by students. So that was also the thing. If you want to develop everything yourself, in our case, we could not just, we could only use the students as our resources. In the second project, when we had this company, the Dutch Rose Media, then it has been the municipality, well, actually not the municipality, but the province, who had launched a call, and they have selected a company to do the development further. And for them, I think the development part was much higher. I think it was around 100K. But that was because of the technological part. But the project is in its entirety, but mainly focusing on the storyline and on the concept. We have always done it with 20, 30K really.
Yeah.
So it's not that much if you think about that. But okay, that's also because we are not a design agency. We are, academics. Essentially.
Yeah. Perfect, thank you. Morda še kakšno drugo vprašanje? maybe some other question left in the audience. I think not. Maybe last points in the chat, if anyone. Okay, then I would really like to thank you, Licia, for your time, for really, really interesting examples and really, I mean, highly inspirational lecture. And I really hope this is not the last time we had the chance to exchange ideas, hear more about the stories and updates of what's happening. So I really hope that we are able to maybe also in the future in our beautiful region find a way to maybe translate one of the really inspiring stories or myths or myths, maybe that's also one of the elements.
That would be indeed very nice. You see, everything is possible, and again, you just start indeed with a myth, with a story, with whatever. See to connect to the locations, maybe to the local community, because then you really know that it is a grassroots movement, and then you see how you want to translate it in something more tangible. As I said, it doesn't need to be anything high spec. Really, it has to be something that engages and that touches people at an emotional level. This is really the message of all these examples.
Yeah, and I think a beautiful message to wrap up our session today. Thank you so much, Licia.
Thank you for listening to me, and I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope to be in touch and also to meet you for real one day.
Perfect. That's also what we aim for, hopefully soon. Najlepša hvala vsem še enkrat za odlično družbo in vprašanja in še seveda povabilo na naše zadnje predavanje, ki bo prihodnji teden v torek, se pravi tokrat že 7. decembra, ponovno ob 17:30 uri z našo zadnjo gostjo, dr. Olgo Kolokito, ki pa nam bo predstavila malce bolj tudi primere dobrih praks na podeželju, predvsem uporabo kulturne dediščine kulture kot katalizator in povezavo v bistvu predvsem z kulturno politiko oziroma kako v bistvu je harmonija kulturne politike in res konkretnih projektov v ruralnem okolju mogoče povzdigniti na zelo visoko raven. Tako da iskrena hvala še enkrat in upam, da se vidimo tudi v prihodnjem tednu. Nasvidenje.